we thought we might discuss the topic of what to do when you have to tell a client bad news. Unfortunately, lawyers aren't magicians, and sometimes we have to tell the client that things didn't go your way, and it might be due to circumstances that happened before the attorney got involved that the attorney really can't control. Sometimes things just didn't work out. Maybe a hearing didn't go the right way, and we got a court order that didn't, say what we wanted it to say. Maybe a negotiation isn't going to go the way that we wanted it to go. So lots of different scenarios that we could maybe bring up in the conversation, but the overall topic today is how to communicate bad news to a client. What are your thoughts, Seth?
Well, I love how you just tee it up and then throw it over to me to try to answer this difficult question, but it is so important. It's such an important aspect of being an attorney. And also, when you're running a firm, you're going to inevitably run into these scenarios where things didn't go as planned. And that could be from the case perspective, it could be from a billing expectation. And so you're going to have different scenarios that come up, and the bad news piece is really important. And so I think one of the most important discussions that you need to probably have thought through even ahead of time is, what is your timing going to be when you get that bad news? And we've talked before kind of how Indiana does that from the court perspective in terms of sending out court orders, and they process them overnight, and they typically get sent out in the early morning hours of the day. And so I may not get notice of an order until a day after. It's possible that my client has actually seen the order on the court's website the night before and already has an email in my inbox by the time we get going the next day. And so timing is really, I think, one of those important things. And there's a lot of nuance to that. My general philosophy is bad news doesn't get better with age. And so if I have good news or bad news to share with a client, I try to get it to them right away. But that's a general rule, and there's always exceptions to that. So what's your approach on that?
Well, my approach is, first of all, knowing the client and knowing kind of what's going on in their life. And, sometimes the bad news can wait a day or two. There may be situations where, it might be the passing of a loved one has recently occurred. And so that's really top of mind for the client. And whatever I might have going on is still really important, but it could wait a couple days. And then I can communicate to the client what's going on. So if you're aware of some of the personal affairs that are happening with the client and, kind of the stress levels that they have, then timing can really impact how well or how poorly certain news is received. And so I try to be aware of that. There's always the obligation to communicate the bad news. It's not like you're trying to avoid the communication of that bad news, but you just want to, be a little bit wise when it comes to communicating that as far as the timing is concerned. Kind of along those lines, though, is if I can be ahead of the bad news before my client finds out about the bad news, I feel like I can steer that conversation in a way that the client is going to have more of a measured reaction to the news rather than, if the client finds out by himself, then, he may be coming to my office fighting mad, wanting to know what's going on. But if I can say, hey, I got something I need to talk with you about, things didn't go that well, but this is kind of what I expected. And if you can understand the reasons why the decision was made or the result was had the way that it was, if you can understand the reasoning and then you explain that to the client, and you're the one that's really first providing that news to the client, then you really are going to be able to control that conversation. And that's what I've always tried to do is, prep the client first for the possible bad decision, get the bad decision, and then communicate again the reasons why we got the bad decision or the bad result. And then the client can kind of at intervals start to come to terms with what has actually happened.